I've been teaching at the Central European University from 2004. I'm a historian of political thought and intellectual history, and I have been working mainly on East Central Europe. I wrote a book with colleagues about history of political thought and how modernity was negotiated from the Enlightenment to the 21st century in East Central Europe. And I also wrote now a new book on crisis, how crisis is conceptualized in the interwar period and what can we learn from it. Can we learn something from looking at the history of crisis?
Pourquoi pleures-tu? Tu as laissé ta poupée, me dis-tu, dans sa petite maison.
I think people's identities are usually performative and situational, and because they have certain kind of experiences, formative experiences, so it's not that they are randomly choosing, but these kind of choices are still concatenated in a certain way and are reinforced by certain kind of feedbacks from society. So it's not like that you know, Russian society has one identity or Ukrainian society has one identity. This is a kind of dialogical relationship, and it is being formed by formative experiences, like what makes certain groups feel at ease, what traumatizes them, how these traumas are transmitted.
Et tu ne lui as pas dit bonne nuit. Dans ses rêves sans toi, tu penses qu'elle s'ennuie.
It's true that the war, of course, makes people somehow come together, at least those who are affected in the same way. Obviously, if you are on occupied territory, then you have to raise very different questions. But, you know, Ukrainian society that is now bombarded is bombarded now into some sort of unity, as that people who didn't speak the same language, who didn't have the same political identity, who had very different regional experiences, very different longue durée transmitted cultural experiences, very different understanding of the Second World War, very different traumas, are now actually treated by the bombs basically as similar, and as a result many of the things come together.
Demain matin, qui va lui faire ses nattes? Elle est belle, mais c'est pas un automate.
This is also interesting with language, that to what extent Ukrainian language is kind of becoming normative in the context of the war, that people shifted, like many young people, for example, shifted to use Ukrainian because they feel that they cannot use the language of the enemy, but it doesn't work with the old generation where like their grandparents still speak Russian very often. So, but it doesn't mean Russian identity. Yes, I mean it means usually it can be as Ukrainian identity as it can get in terms of political division, but it still means completely different identification with language as a identity marker. So what I try to say is that it's very, very situational, and you have to be very careful not to talk about one Ukrainian identity and one Russian identity. It would be very, very misleading. And I think exactly this multiplicity of positions, if it is kind of cultivated by a political elite and if it is not suppressed, it makes democratic societies democratic, yes, that people have negotiation position and power in the political society with articulating their differences.
Qui va lui choisir ses plus beaux habits et lui inventer une nouvelle vie?
Yes, I think it's for me a very, very striking experience. I have to say also existential, humanly. It's also a kind of very specific state of I think mind where you want to actually show to the ones who disrupt your life that they cannot disrupt your life, that you will be still studying and learning and teaching and researching, even if they make your life very, very complicated. And I think that's one obvious drive, and I think that it was very strong from the very beginning. There was a very strong, and I think this is connected to something that if we are talking about collective experiences, that I mean, after all, Ukrainian society has a very long-term experience of not having a state. Yes, so I mean, like let's face, I mean, like Ukrainian modern state is a very modern phenomenon, and that makes it possible for society to kind of operate communicate very, very quickly and very, very efficiently, not necessarily waiting for the state to tell them what to do. And we found out that almost in every European country, there is very strong organization of Ukrainian diaspora or refugee scholars, and they are kind of networking with each other, networking with the local academic culture, trying to kind of transfer information. So I mean, there is a very strong resilience in this. And what we were trying to do ourselves was basically to try to connect Western offers of solidarity with Ukrainian demand. And I see a young generation of Ukrainian scholars who are now actually in Western European or American institutions and who are writing absolutely fantastic things, trying to rethink also the relationship of the West to the Russian imperial space, because I mean very often Western scholarship of Russia was focused on Moscow, so it was concentric understanding of Russian history, and it didn't really take into account the non-central aspects of the Russian imperial space. And now it's possible to kind of rethink, partially also because most of the Western scholars cannot go to Russia to do research, obviously, or basically none of them can go. So now it's possible to rethink the whole imperial space from the semi-peripheries, or actually also question the whether center and periphery is a good concept.
Ces secrets, y a que toi qui les connais. T'arrives à la faire rire.
No sane Ukrainian would sign an agreement that say that these territories that were occupied by Russia belong to Russia, and I think it goes against all the post-1945. In practical terms, I think the majority of the Ukrainian society, I've seen statistics that I think something like 70% of the civilian population and I think more than 50% of the military would have been signing off an agreement which freezes the front and basically guarantees for the front line to be a hard front line. Yes, so basically that it either means NATO accession or NATO peacekeeping truce. So like it becomes a front or a demarcation line that cannot be crossed anymore, which would mean that Ukrainian society can start focusing on post-war reconstruction. It could actually construct its own economic and political and cultural future in the way that a democratic country could do it, and it doesn't have to fear that next morning a dog crosses the demarcation line and Russians bombard Kiev to the ground.
T'imagines pour elle un carnaval.
But obviously Trump disrupted this. I mean, you are journal of disruption, but I mean, disruption can be good and bad, and I think intellectual disruption can be very productive. But if you disrupt the global world order in terms of going back to pre-Westphalian understanding of territoriality, then it's super dangerous. And I mean, my feeling is that by now we have a moment that there is no consensus on any level of what, for example, democratic sovereignty might mean, what territoriality means in this context. I mean, like, what economic development might mean, what integration might mean, who is integrating where. So, I mean, like, there are very serious questions. And my feeling is that now Ukraine, I think, is quite legitimately claiming, and I think Russians help to send this message in some ways, that they are fighting for Europe. Yes, I mean, like when the drones are in Stockholm or in Tromsø as yesterday, then it's very clear message from the Russian side that actually they are honestly confirming this argument by threatening the whole European political sphere.
Même ceux cassés et les petits soldats. Maman, c'est quand qu'on rentre?
There are, I think, very serious tensions here. Ukraine fighting for Europe, which I think is true, but we shouldn't be complacent, and we shouldn't say that no, it's very nice that somebody else is fighting for us. I mean, like, I think Europe should actually realize that this is a life and death situation in some ways. That this is a very serious challenge, not only because of Russia, it's because of America as well. In fact, and I think unless we are able to, for example, create some sort of European public sphere, and here I think journalists have a very serious role as well, where people can identify with common causes, and this Europeanism shouldn't be this kind of Occidentalist Europeanism. Yes, that like we are better, should be rather a kind of feeling of solidarity, openness, but at the same time also confirming and believing in certain values. We have certain traditions, we have certain experiences, we have certain traumas. I mean, negative traumas, which are kind of very formative. I mean, be it the Holocaust or be it of the First World War, where nationalism led to destruction. And then we have to kind of own up these experiences, collective experiences, and do something with them. And that's why I think also, by the way, history might be relevant for decision making. Democracies are always very slow reactions, like reaction speed, because I mean they are basically deliberative, like in contrast to autocratic regimes, which are able to mobilize very quickly resources. But then on the long run, deliberative systems are able to kind of create longer term solidarities around their projects, whereas these autocratic regimes are super dependent on the personality of the autocrat. I mean, like if Putin would, now die, then it would barely survive.